Earth hit back. Hard. The galaxy has never been the same. Part 1: The Weight of Chains. The sky above New London was never really dark anymore. Every night, the Vreth command ships sat in low orbit like giant metal clouds, their lights blinking slow and cold. They had been there for 200 years. Most humans had stopped looking up. Colonel Ray Drake still looked up. He stood on the edge of the cargo dock, hands in his coat pockets, watching the orange glow of the nearest Vreth cruiser move slowly across the black sky. It was quiet this time of night. The dock workers had gone home. The crates of iron ore sat in long rows, already tagged and counted, ready for the morning pickup. The Vreth did not like to wait for their tribute. Drake had been stationed here for 3 months. Before that, it was the mines in what used to be called Norway. Before that, the fields of the Midwest, where humans harvested food they were not allowed to eat. He had spent most of his adult life working for the Vreth Auxiliary Corps, humans in uniforms, doing the jobs the Vreth considered beneath them. He was very good at looking like he had accepted it. The dock gate opened behind him. He heard heavy boots on the metal grating and turned to see 2 Vreth overseers walking toward the ore crates. They were tall, nearly 8 feet, with gray-green scaled skin and eyes that caught the dock lights like mirrors. One of them carried a counting tablet. The other just carried itself like it owned everything, which Drake supposed it did. Behind them walked old Tom. Tom Hurst was 63 years old. He had worked the New London docks since he was 16. He knew every crate number, every shipping lane, every quota by heart. The Vreth kept him because he was useful. He kept working because his grandchildren needed to eat. Drake watched as the overseer with the tablet stopped in front of the iron ore rows. It scanned. Then it scanned again. Then it turned to Tom and made a sound, a sharp, low click in its throat that meant displeasure. 2 crates short, the overseer said. Its translator spoke in flat, perfect English. The quota was 400. You have 398. Tom's face went still. The North loader broke down this afternoon. I reported it. We moved everything by hand after that. We worked 4 extra hours. The quota was 400. I know, sir. But the machine. 400. Not 398. Drake felt his hand move toward his sidearm, without him deciding to. He stopped it. He made it go back to his pocket. He stood very still. What happened next took less than 10 seconds. Drake walked back to the barracks slowly. He did not run. He did not let his face do anything. He had learned that a long time ago, how to put everything behind his eyes where no one could see it. He had become very good at that too. He sat on the edge of his bunk. The room was empty. His bunkmates were still on shift. Tom Hurst had worked those docks for 47 years. He had a daughter in what used to be Edinburgh. 3 grandchildren. Drake had seen the photo, once, sitting on Tom's work desk, 3 small faces grinning at the camera. 2 crates. Drake opened his footlocker and pulled out the small, thin tablet he kept buried under a false bottom. He turned it on. There was one message, marked with no sender name, just a small green. He had been waiting for it for 6 weeks. It was 3 words. I found it. He stared at those words for a long moment. Outside the barracks window, a Vreth patrol craft hummed past, close enough to rattle the glass. Its searchlight swept across the wall, moved on, and left the room dark again. Drake closed the tablet. He lay back on his bunk and looked at the ceiling. He thought about Tom. He thought about the 3 kids in the photo. He thought about the North loader that had broken down, and the 4 extra hours, and the 98 crates moved by hand in the cold. He thought about what he had spent the last 15 years helping to build, slowly, carefully, piece by piece, in silence, underneath the feet of an empire that had never once considered that the people it put in chains might be counting the links. Then he did something he had not allowed himself to do in a very long time. He smiled. The message came from a woman Drake had never met in person. He knew her only as Vance. Dr. Nora Vance. A physicist. Former professor at what used to be called Cambridge University, back when universities were still allowed to teach real science. The Vreth had shut most of them down 50 years ago. They did not like humans learning too much. That had been a mistake. Drake sent a reply through the same hidden channel, one word. When? The answer came back in 4 hours. 3 days. The location was a set of coordinates that, on any normal map, would show nothing but empty ocean off the coast of what used to be Portugal. He told his commanding officer he needed to inspect a supply route. His officer, a Vreth sergeant named something unpronounceable, waved him off without looking up. Drake was reliable, quiet. He never caused problems. That was exactly what they thought of him, and he had worked very hard to make them think it. The submarine surfaced just long enough to let him board. Drake climbed down 3 levels of steel ladder into a tunnel that smelled like rock and cold water. 2 soldiers with no insignia on their jackets led him through a series of doors, each one heavier than the last. Then the tunnel opened up, and Drake stopped walking. The cave was enormous. It stretched out under the ocean floor like a cathedral hollowed from solid rock. Lights hung from cables strung across the ceiling. Below them, on a wide flat floor, sat rows of metal workbenches, equipment racks, and computer stations. People moved between them, maybe 200 of them, all working, all quiet, all focused. He had known, in a general way, that the remnant was real. He had passed messages, hidden equipment, looked the other way at the right moments for 15 years. But he had never seen the center of it. He had not imagined it was this big. Colonel Drake. A woman walked toward him across the cave floor. She was short, maybe 50 years old, with gray hair cut close to her head and sharp eyes that took him in like she was reading a document. "I'm Vance. You made good time." "I had motivation," he said. She showed him the council first. They met in a side chamber, a round room with a stone table and 6 chairs. 2 of the seats were already filled. General May Holt sat with her one remaining arm resting on the table. She was 70 years old and looked like she was made of wire and cold air. Drake had heard stories about her. She had commanded the last real human military resistance in 2301, before the Vreth crushed it. Everyone thought she was dead. She was not dead. Sal Okonkwo sat across from her. He was a big man, broad-shouldered, with grease still on his hands from whatever he had been working on before this meeting. He was an engineer. The best one alive, according to everyone who had worked with him. He nodded at Drake like they were old friends, though they had never met. "Sit down," Holt said. Not unkind, just direct. Drake sat. "You've been carrying pieces of this for 15 years, Holt said. It's time you saw the whole picture. The whole picture took 2 hours to explain. 40 years ago, a small group of humans had made a decision. Not to fight, not yet. The 2301 resistance had proved that direct fighting was useless. The Vreth had more ships, more weapons, and no reluctance to kill entire cities as a warning to others. A direct fight was a death wish. So instead, they had done something else. They had gotten jobs. Inside the Vreth military logistics system. Inside the ore processing plants. Inside the orbital shipyards where Vreth vessels were refueled and repaired. Inside the communication relay stations. Anywhere a quiet, reliable human worker could be placed without suspicion. And from those positions over 4 decades, they had watched, listened, learned. They had passed tiny pieces of information back through hidden channels, technical manuals, engineering schematics, weapon system layouts, command protocols. Thousands of people over 40 years, each one carrying one small piece of a very large puzzle. The remnant had assembled the puzzle. "The Vreth believe we are simple," Holt said. "They think patience is a human weakness. That we forget. That we accept." She looked at Drake steadily. They were wrong on all 3 counts. Then Vance showed him what she had found. She pulled up a diagram on the cave's main screen, a complex web of lines and numbers that meant nothing to Drake at first glance. She explained it in plain language. Every Vreth ship ran on a drive system that used resonance frequencies to maintain its power core. Those frequencies were calibrated to Vreth biology, specifically to the electromagnetic field produced by a living Vreth crew. It was an old design from the early days of their empire, and it had never been changed because no enemy had ever understood it well enough to use it against them. Vance had understood it. "If you match the frequency and reverse it," she said, The core doesn't explode. It doesn't burn. It simply stops. Every system on the ship shuts down at once. No warning. No override. She paused. I've tested it on 3 captured drive units. It works every time. The room was quiet for a moment. Every ship? Drake asked. Every ship built in the last 400 years. They all use the same base design. Vance looked at him calmly. The entire Vreth fleet has the same off switch. They just never knew anyone was looking for it. Drake sat back in his chair. He had spent 15 years believing, in a quiet and careful way, that humanity might have a chance. This was the first moment he believed they might actually win. Holt let him sit with it for a few seconds. Then she spoke. We don't get a second chance at this. If we move too early or too slowly, or if even one thing goes wrong and they find out what we know, she did not finish the sentence. She did not need to. Everyone in the room understood what the Vreth did to worlds that caused them problems. So we don't miss, Drake said. Holt looked at him. Something shifted in her expression. Not quite a smile, but close. No, she said. We don't miss. The Vreth thought they knew what humans were good for. Digging. Carrying. Building. For 200 years, they had watched humans move rock and pour metal and assemble structures on 6 continents. Reliable workers. Strong backs. No real ambition. The Vreth had decided this about humanity very early and had never thought to reconsider it. That was going to cost them everything. Sal Okonkwo took Drake on the tour the next morning. They started 300 meters below sea level in a tunnel that ran along the ocean floor off the Atlantic coast. Sal walked fast and talked faster, like a man who had been waiting a very long time to show someone his work. This section took 11 years, Sal said, gesturing at the curved walls around them. We carved it out using the same equipment we used for the Vreth or tunnels. Reported every meter of it as geological survey work. Nobody looked twice. Drake looked at the walls. The rock had been cut clean and smooth, then reinforced with a material he didn't recognize, dark gray, slightly warm to the touch. What is that? He asked. Heat-absorbing compound. Blocks thermal scans from orbit. Sal smiled a little. We learned that from the Vreth, actually. Their own ships use something similar. They turned a corner. Drake stopped. The cavern was the size of a city. He had seen the workshop cave the night before and thought that was impressive. This was something else entirely. The ceiling was so high it disappeared into darkness. The floor stretched out in every direction, divided into sections by low walls and walkways, each section holding something different. Warships. Row after row of them, sitting in dry docks carved from the ocean floor. They were not pretty. They were not built to impress anyone. They were long and angular and dark, shaped like the head of a spear, with weapon ports running along every surface like scales on a fish. Drake counted the nearest row, 12 ships, side by side. He looked down the length of the cavern. There were a lot more rows. How many? He asked. In this location, for 112, Sal said. There are 2 more caverns. One under the Pacific. One under what used to be the Arctic Ocean. He paused. Total count is 1,206. Ready to fly. Drake was quiet for a long moment. He had known, in an abstract way, that the Remnant had been building ships. He had helped move parts for years without knowing what they were for. But knowing and seeing were 2 different things. The Vreth have 40,000 warships, Drake said. Yes, Sal said. He did not seem concerned. But 40,000 ships with a broken power core are just very expensive metal floating in space. He started walking again. Come on. There's more. There was more. The railguns were built into the sides of mountains. From the outside, they looked like ore processing towers, industrial equipment, common, boring, invisible. On the inside, each one held a barrel 300 meters long, capable of putting a metal slug through the hull of an orbital station from the ground. There were 64 of them, distributed across every continent. The bioweapons lab was smaller, a single facility, deep underground in what used to be Central Africa, run by a team of 12 scientists who had spent 20 years studying Vreth biology. Drake did not fully understand what they had built there, but Sal explained it simply enough. A targeted pathogen that affected only Vreth respiratory systems. Harmless to every other species. Delivered as a gas. Slow-acting but certain. We hope we never use it, Sal said. But we built it. Because they would. Drake nodded. He understood that logic completely. Last, Sal brought him to a long, low building near the back of the Atlantic Cavern. Inside were 24 machines, each one the size of a small truck, sitting in a row on raised platforms. They hummed quietly, a sound Drake felt more in his chest than his ears. Vances, Sal said simply. The resonance cannons. The weapon that made everything else possible. Each one could broadcast the shutdown frequency across a range of 40,000 kilometers. 24 of them, working together, could cover an entire planetary orbit. Drake walked slowly along the row, looking at each machine. They were not impressive to look at. They did not look like weapons at all. They looked like something you might find in a university laboratory, which, in a way, was exactly what they were. That evening, the Remnant Council met again. There were 12 people around the stone table this time. Holt at the head, Vance to her left, Sal across from Drake. 8 others he had not met yet, commanders, engineers, intelligence officers, each of them carrying 15 or 20 years of this secret like a stone in their chest. One of them, a quiet man named Rees who ran the Remnant's intelligence network, raised the problem directly. We are at 80%, Rees said. The Pacific Cavern is still 6 months from completion. 2 of the railgun towers are not yet online. If we wait until we are fully ready, we won't get the chance, Drake said. Everyone looked at him. He laid it out plainly. The new tribute demands. The increased seismic scans the Vreth had been running over the past 2 months. The fact that a Vreth intelligence officer, a careful one by all accounts, had already flagged something unusual in the Alps. They are not suspicious yet, Drake said. But they are curious. And curious becomes suspicious. And suspicious becomes a scan that finds everything. He looked around the table. 80% ready is enough. Waiting for 100% means never getting the chance to find out. The room was silent. Holt looked at each face around the table one by one. No one disagreed. No one had a better argument. Some of them looked afraid. That was fine. Fear was reasonable. Fear meant they understood what was at stake. 90 days, Holt said. We launch in 90 days. Nobody cheered. Nobody smiled. They just nodded, quietly, the way people do when a decision has been made that cannot be taken back. Outside, somewhere far above them, a Vreth patrol ship passed over the ocean. Its skin swept down through the water and the rock and the silence, found nothing and moved on. It is not the building or the training or the long years of silence. Those things are hard, yes. But they have a shape. You can see them. You can measure them. You can hold a weapon in your hand and know it is real. The hardest part is the morning after you set the date. When you wake up and walk outside and smile at a Vreth overseer and hand in your daily report and act completely and perfectly like nothing has changed. When everything has changed. Drake was assigned an escort duty on day 3 of the countdown. His orders came directly from the Vreth garrison commander, a routine assignment, nothing unusual. A Vreth noble was making an inspection tour of Earth's northern territories. Drake was selected to lead the human honor guard. Reliable. Quiet. Never causes problems. The noble's name was Lord Drek. He was tall even by Vreth standards, with pale yellow scales and small cold eyes that moved over everything like he was calculating its worth. He wore robes that cost more than a human worker earned in 10 years. He spoke to Drake exactly once, on the first day, to tell him to keep the hover transport at a steady speed because the vibration disturbed his rest. Drake said, "Yes, my lord," and I kept the transport perfectly steady for 3 weeks. Every morning he stood at attention while Drek inspected farms and processing plants and labor camps, watching the noble move through crowds of exhausted humans without once looking any of them in the eye. Every evening Drake filed a smooth, professional report and went back to his quarters and sat on his bunk and did not allow himself to feel anything. 67 days left. 66. 65. He counted everyone. On day 31, something almost went wrong. Reese sent a message through the hidden channel, short, no extra words. The Vreth intelligence officer, the careful one named Vraxis, had ordered a deep geological scan of the Alpine region. Full penetration. Scheduled for 48 hours from now. The remnant had 3 tunnel networks in the Alps. 2 of them held weapons caches. 1 held a resonance cannon in final assembly. Drake read the message in a bathroom in a Vreth administrative building in what used to be Oslo. He read it twice. Then he sent 1 word back. Move. What followed was 48 hours that Drake was not present for but heard about later, in pieces, from the people who lived through it. 212 people moving equipment through tunnels in total silence. No lights in the final 3 hours because a Vreth drone passed overhead and thermal shields only blocked so much. Carrying pieces of a half-assembled machine through passages barely wide enough for 1 person, in the dark, by feel. They got everything out with 6 hours to spare. When the Vreth scan came back, it showed solid rock. Drake received the confirmation while standing at attention beside Lord Drek at a mineral processing plant in northern Finland. He did not change his expression. He did not move. He just breathed out very slowly through his nose and watched Drek examine a production report with complete disinterest. 58 days left. He met Ben Cole on day 44. The boy had been assigned to Drake's auxiliary unit as a replacement soldier. 18 years old. Brown hair, average height, unremarkable in every way except for his eyes, which were too old for his face. Drake had seen that look before. He owned it himself. He found out why on the second evening, when Cole was sitting alone after mess and Drake sat down across from him, without invitation. "You volunteered," Drake said. It was not a question. Cole looked at him. "How did you know?" "Because nobody with that expression gets assigned anywhere. They find their way." Drake waited. Cole was quiet for a moment. Then, "My sister. 2 years ago. Labor detail, outer platform. She never came back." Drake nodded slowly. He did not say he was sorry. Sorry was a small word for a large thing, and Cole did not look like he wanted small words. "Stay close to me," Drake said. "Learn everything. Don't do anything until I tell you it's time." Cole looked at him for a long moment, like he was deciding whether to ask what that meant. Then he seemed to decide. He already knew. "Yes, sir," he said. On day 79, they lost Henrik. He was one of Holt's oldest contacts, a man who had been part of the remnant almost from the beginning. He was caught by a Vreth patrol near a weapons cache in Eastern Europe. Wrong place. Wrong moment. The kind of bad luck that no amount of planning can prevent. The Vreth took him to an interrogation facility. He was there for 4 days. He did not say anything. On the 4th day he died, and the Vreth got nothing. Drake heard about it the same night. He was alone in his quarters. He sat with it for a while. The weight of a man's name, a man he had never met, who had carried this secret for decades and taken it with him when he went. 10 days left. On day 89, Vance ran the final test. Drake was patched in through a secure audio link, standing in a storage room in a Vreth garrison building, pretending to inventory equipment. He heard the hum of the resonance cannon building through the earpiece. He heard Vance counting down in a calm, flat voice. Then he heard the tone clean and sharp and exactly right, and then silence. "Confirmed," Vance said. "All 24 units operational. Frequency locked. Range verified." A pause. "We're ready." Drake removed the earpiece and put it in his pocket. He picked up his inventory clipboard. He walked back out into the garrison corridor and nodded politely at a Vreth soldier passing the other way. 1 day left. That night, he lay on his bunk and stared at the ceiling for a long time. He thought about the 90 days. About Drek and his steady hover transport. About the Alpine tunnels moved in the dark. About Cole's 2 old eyes. About Henrik, who died quiet. He thought about 1,200 ships sitting still and silent under oceans and ice, waiting. Then, for only the second time in many years, he let himself believe it.
Tomorrow.
At 0400 hours on March 12, 2387, every Vreth communication satellite above Earth went dark. Not destroyed. Not jammed. Just dark. Clean and sudden, like a candle being pinched out between two fingers. One moment, the Vreth orbital network was humming with data, patrol reports, tribute schedules, command traffic. The next moment, it was silent. In the Vreth garrison headquarters in New London, a communications officer stared at his blank screens for 4 full seconds before he understood that this was not a technical error. By then, it was already too late. The ships came up from the water first. Along every ocean coastline on Earth, the sea began to move. Not from wind or current from below. The Atlantic boiled white in long straight lines as 1,200 ships rose through the surface in near-perfect unison, water streaming from dark hulls, engines already running hot. They came up slowly, almost gently, like they had all the time in the world. They did not. From the mountains, the desert floors, the frozen plains of the Arctic, more ships. Rising from camouflaged hangars that had sat invisible for decades. Rising through hatches disguised as rock and ice and open ground. Rising and turning and pointing at the sky without a single wasted second. 1,206 ships. All at once. The Vreth orbital platform saw them coming and began to raise shields. They were fast. Experienced. Well-trained. They were not fast enough. Vance activated the resonance network at 0411 hours. She was in the Atlantic Command cavern, sitting at a plain metal desk with a headset on and a mug of cold coffee beside her that she had not touched. Around her, 20 technicians monitored the 24 cannon units distributed across the planet. Every unit was green. Every frequency was locked. She looked at the screen showing the 3 Vreth command ships in low orbit, the largest vessels above Earth, each one capable of turning a city to ash in under a minute. She pressed the switch. The resonance pulse went up through the atmosphere in less than a second. It did not look like anything. It made no sound, no flash, no visible wave. It simply rose, invisible and precise, and found the 3 command ships exactly where they were. On the screens, the 3 ships stopped. No explosion. No fire. No dramatic death spin toward the planet below. Their lights went out. Their engines stopped. Their shields dropped. They became, in a single instant, 3 very large and very dead pieces of metal hanging in orbit, slowly beginning to drift. Vance stared at the screens for a long moment. "It works," she said quietly, to no one in particular. One of the technicians made a sound that was half laugh, half something else entirely. Nobody blamed him. On the ground, Drake moved at 0415. The Vreth garrison in New London had 400,000 soldiers. Without orbital support, without communication to the command ships, without orders coming down from above, they were still 400,000 armed soldiers. Dangerous. Confused. And about to become desperate. Drake led the ground assault personally. He had Cole on his left and a unit of 40 remnant fighters at his back, all of them in Vreth auxiliary uniforms for the first 60 seconds, long enough to get through the garrison gate before the alarm fully sounded. After that, it did not matter what they were wearing. The fighting inside the garrison was close and ugly. The Vreth were bigger and stronger, and they had weapons designed to stop things much worse than humans. But they were fighting blind. No coordination, no orders, no idea how many attackers there were or where they were coming from. And the humans knew exactly where every corridor led, every control panel sat, every door opened. They had studied the blueprints for 11 years. Drake took a hit on his left shoulder at 0431, a glancing shot that burned through his jacket and left his arm numb for the rest of the morning. He switched his weapon to his right hand and kept moving. Stopping was not an option. Stopping meant thinking, and thinking right now meant slowing down, and slowing down meant people dying behind him. Cole fought like a man who had been waiting his whole life for exactly this moment. He probably had. At 0500 hours, Holt broadcast the signal. It went out on every open Vreth military frequency in the sector. A tight, compressed data burst that looked like noise to anyone who did not know what to look for. Inside it, hidden in the structure of the signal itself, was a message. Not words. A set of technical instructions. Specifically, the resonance frequency. The off switch. The thing Vance had spent 20 years finding. And beneath the technical data, one line of plain text. We found the way.
Rise.
It was aimed at every occupied world in the Vreth Dominion. 40 planets. Hundreds of millions of people who had been carrying the same weight humans had carried for generations. People who had been waiting, maybe without even knowing they were waiting, for someone to go first. Earth went first. By noon, the orbital battle was over. The 3 command ships were cold and drifting. The Vreth orbital platforms had been taken or destroyed. Human ships held every approach vector above the planet. Earth's sky, for the first time in 200 years, belonged to no one who wanted to use it against the people below. The ground fighting continued into the afternoon. Pockets of Vreth soldiers held out in garrison buildings across 4 continents, cut off and receiving no orders. One by one, through the long hours of that first day, they surrendered or were overcome. Drake was still in the New London garrison when the final holdout laid down its weapons at 1,640 hours. He was sitting on the floor of a corridor with his back against the wall, his shoulder wrapped in a field dressing, watching 2 of his people tend to a wounded fighter nearby. Cole came around the corner and crouched down next to him. "It's done," Cole said. "The whole garrison. They're down." Drake nodded. He did not say anything for a moment. Outside, somewhere in the city, he could hear people. Not screaming, not fighting. Just people. Voices. A sound he could not quite name at first because he had not heard it in a very long time. It was the sound of a city exhaling. He remembered what he still had to do. Lord Drek had fled the moment the alarm sounded. Drake had expected that. There was a shuttle, registered to Drek's household, that had launched from the northern port at 0418. Drake touched his earpiece. Navigation. Drek's shuttle. Where is it? Intercepted at outer atmosphere. INS Reckoning has it locked. Good, Drake said. Don't destroy it. I want every Vreth frequency in the sector to watch what happens next. He got to his feet slowly, his shoulder protesting every centimeter of the movement. Cole offered a hand. Drake took it. Above them, through the garrison ceiling, through the smoke and the cleared sky, the Reckoning held its position. Patient. Waiting. Earth was free. The galaxy was watching. Fleet Admiral Cross received them in his command chamber, a vast room of black stone and cold light at the top of the Dominion's central military tower. He was a large Vreth, even by their standards.
Old. Decorated.
He had personally overseen the subjugation of 11 worlds in his career and had never once received a report that he did not know how to answer. He read the first dispatch, then the second, then the third. For 11 minutes, he issued no orders. His staff stood around him in complete silence. Some of them had served him for 20 years. None of them had ever seen 11 seconds of silence from him, let alone 11 minutes. They did not speak. They did not move. They stood and waited and watched the old admiral read the same 3 reports over and over, and they felt, for the first time in their careers, something that Vreth military officers were not supposed to feel. Uncertainty. The intelligence briefing came an hour later. 12 analysts. The best in the Dominion. They stood in a row before Cross and delivered their findings in flat, careful voices, the way people speak when they are delivering news they do not fully believe themselves. The 3 command ships above Earth were confirmed dead. Not damaged. Not captured. Dead. Power cores completely inert. No sign of external weapon impact. No residual heat signature. As if something had simply reached inside each ship and turned it off. The orbital garrison had been neutralized. 400,000 soldiers, the largest ground force stationed on any single colony world, had surrendered or been defeated in under 14 hours. Lord Drek had been captured and was being held aboard a human vessel. His image, alive, unharmed, sitting in a plain chair in a plain room, had been broadcast on every Vreth military frequency in the sector. Not as a threat, just as a fact. We have him. We chose not to harm him. We want you to see that we chose. Cross stared at the image of Drek for a long time. Then the analyst delivered the worst part. The shutdown method, the lead analyst said carefully, appears to target the resonance frequency of our drive cores. We believe it is broadcast-based, which means he paused just briefly. Which means range is the only limiting factor. A sufficiently powerful emitter could affect multiple ships simultaneously. Potentially, an entire fleet. The room was very quiet. Every ship,
Cross said.
every ship built in the last 4 centuries uses the same base drive design. Yes, Admiral. Every ship. Cross looked at the wall. Not at anything on it.
Just at the wall.
By the following morning, 6 other worlds had risen. The signal Earth had sent, hidden inside the broadcast on Vreth military frequencies, had reached occupied planets across 3 sectors. Not all of them had the means to fight back. Most of them did not have ships or weapons or anything close to what Earth had built in secret. But some of them did. The Duran homeworld rose within 18 hours of receiving the signal. 4 armed heavy worlders who had been denied weapons for generations, but had never stopped knowing how to use them. They took the Vreth garrison on their planet using nothing but tools, vehicles, and sheer physical force. The Vreth garrison commander sent one final distress message before his communication tower went down. 3 more worlds followed within 48 hours. The Vreth Dominion, which had not fought a defensive war in over 2 centuries, was suddenly defending 9 fronts at the same time. The fracture inside the Vreth command became visible on the 2nd day. Younger officers gathered in groups in the corridors of the command tower and argued in low, sharp voices. Their position was simple: respond with overwhelming force immediately. Glass Earth. Send a message so clear and so brutal that every other occupied world would abandon any thought of following its example. They were not wrong that this was the traditional answer. The Vreth had glassed worlds before. It worked. Dead planets did not rebel. But the senior commanders knew what the younger ones had not yet fully understood. Sending a fleet to glass Earth meant sending that fleet within range of resonance emitters. It meant putting every ship in that fleet at risk of simply stopping, dead in space, helpless, broadcasting its own defeat to the rest of the galaxy. The Dominion had never lost a fleet. If it lost one now, to a dirt colony, the message that sent to every occupied world would be far worse than the one they were trying to prevent. Cross listened to both sides. He said nothing for a long time. Then he gave the order. Full fleet mobilization. Every available warship in 4 sectors. 4,000 vessels assembled at a staging point beyond resonance range. Not a glass and leave operation. A proper campaign. Coordinated. Careful. Designed to overwhelm the human fleet with pure numbers before the emitters could target more than a fraction of them. We will not make the mistake of underestimating them a second time, Cross said. He did not say what everyone in the room already understood. That saying it that way meant admitting they had underestimated humanity the first time. That admission, quiet as it was, had never been made before. Beyond the Dominion's borders, others watched. The Talhari Collective had 17 observation ships positioned throughout the region. Their council received a full intelligence report within 24 hours of Earth's uprising. They read it twice. Then they called an emergency session that lasted 11 hours. The Oran Senate sent a single encrypted message to 3 of its closest allies. The message was 2 sentences long. The second sentence was, "Prepare contingency plans." The ancient Mech Confederacy, which had not issued a public statement on galactic affairs in 40 years, went completely silent, which, for the Mech, meant they were paying very close attention. None of them moved. None of them committed to anything. They watched. They calculated. They waited to see which way the tide would run. It was, all of them privately agreed, the most interesting thing to happen in the galaxy in a very long time. On Earth, Drake received Cross's mobilization order through an intercepted Vreth signal at 0300 the next morning. He sat in the dark command room on the Reckoning and read the numbers, 4,000 ships, and was quiet for a while. Then he called Vance.
"They're coming," he said. "I know," she said.
She did not sound afraid. She sounded like someone who had been expecting this and had already decided what to do about it. How long? 60 days. Maybe less.
A pause.
Then we have work to do, Vance said. Drake looked out the viewport at Earth below. Dark oceans, scattered lights, the thin curve of atmosphere holding everything in. 200 years under someone else's boot. One day free. One day was enough to know they were not going back. About its people, its cities, the weight on its back. He had fought for it, bled for it, built something under its feet that no one had thought possible. Earth was everything he understood and everything he had ever cared about. It took standing on the bridge of the reckoning, looking at a star map full of other worlds lit up with rebellion, to make him realize how small that thinking had been. Earth was not the only world that had been waiting. Holt gave him the mission on the third day after liberation. 6 worlds had risen. 3 more were showing signs of organized resistance. None of them had Earth's resources or Earth's hidden fleet, but all of them had something. People who were angry, people who were ready, people who had been carrying the same stone for just as long. They need to know we are real, Holt said. Not a signal, not a broadcast. A ship, a face. Someone who comes to them and looks them in the eye and says, "We see you, and we are not leaving you behind."
Drake looked at the map.
How much time before Cross's fleet is assembled? 50 days. Maybe 55. That's not much time to build an alliance. No, Holt agreed. It isn't. She looked at him steadily. So don't waste any of it. He took the reckoning, a crew of 300, Vance, and a young diplomat named Iris Callow, who had been working in the Remnant's political division for 4 years and had never once been off-planet. She spent the first hour of the journey gripping her seat and looking at the stars with an expression that was equal parts terror and wonder. Drake understood the feeling. The first stop was the Kalori homeworld. They were an aquatic species, soft-bodied, slow-moving on land, with wide dark eyes and skin that shifted color slightly, depending on their mood. They had been Vreth tributaries for 400 years, longer than any other species in the Dominion. They had no military. They had never had one. The Vreth had never needed to take it from them because they had never built one. What they had instead was the galaxy's most critical hyperspace relay network. Every major trade and communication route in 3 sectors ran through Kalori-maintained relay stations. The Vreth had always considered this a convenient arrangement. It had never occurred to them that it was also a vulnerability. The Kalori Elder Council met Drake in a low, water-cooled chamber that smelled like the sea. They were quiet and careful, and they listened to everything he said without interrupting. When he finished, the eldest of them, a creature that was probably older than the Vreth occupation itself, was still for a long moment. Then it said, in a voice like water moving over stone, "We cannot fight. We do not know how." "I'm not asking you to fight," Drake said. "I'm asking you to close the doors." Another long silence. Then the elder's skin shifted, pale to deep blue, which Iris later told Drake meant something close to resolve. "If we do this," it said, "there is no going back." Drake met its eyes. "No," he said quietly. "There isn't." The Kalori joined the coalition. In exchange for protection, they offered full access to the relay network, which meant that from this point forward, Vreth fleets moving through 3 sectors would be doing so blind, with no advanced communication, no coordination, and no warning. It was, Vance said afterward, possibly the single most valuable alliance in the history of space travel. She was not exaggerating. The Duran were different. They met the reckoning at their orbital boundary with a fleet of salvaged ships held together by what appeared to be determination and welding wire. 4-armed, broad, built for the crushing gravity of their homeworld, the Duran looked at the human vessel with open curiosity and zero fear. Their leader was a woman named Ara. She was missing 2 of her 4 arms, both lost in the garrison uprising 3 days earlier, and she stood in the docking bay without any sign that this bothered her in the slightest. "You sent the signal," she said to Drake. Not a question. "We sent the signal," he confirmed. She looked him up and down, this ordinary-sized human with a bandaged shoulder and tired eyes. Then she made a sound that her translator rendered as laughter, though it was deeper than any laugh Drake had ever heard. "You are smaller than I expected," she said. "Most people say that," Drake said. The Duran had 60 million fighters and no ships worth mentioning. Earth had ships and needed bodies. The arrangement took 11 minutes to agree on. Ara shook Drake's hand with one of her remaining arms and nearly pulled it out of its socket, which she also seemed to find funny. Drake decided he liked her very much. The Synth were the ones he had not expected. They were a hive mind species, small, insect-like, operating in groups of thousands that thought and moved and spoke as a single consciousness. The Vreth had used them as mining labor for generations, treating them as animals, as equipment, as things that could be replaced when they wore out. The Synth had no word for themselves as individuals. They had never needed one. Drake met their collective in a vast underground chamber on their world. Thousands of small bodies arranged in patterns across the floor and walls and ceiling, all of them completely still, all of them watching him with the same unblinking attention. He had prepared a speech. Iris had helped him write it. Careful, diplomatic, respectful of their collective nature. He started to deliver it. He got 3 sentences in before he stopped. He looked around at all of them, at the thousands of small still faces, at creatures who had been called animals by an empire that had worked them like machines for centuries. He folded the speech and put it in his pocket. "I don't have the right words," he said simply. "I just came to tell you that what was done to you was wrong, and that we won't leave you behind." The chamber was silent for a long moment. Then the Synth wept.
Not one of them.
All of them. Thousands of small bodies. All at once. A sound like rain on still water. Drake stood in the middle of it and did not move and did not look away and let them have it for as long as they needed. Iris, standing behind him, had her hand over her mouth. Vance was looking at the floor. The Synth joined the coalition. They brought something no one had thought to ask for. Perfect memory. Every Vreth mining protocol, every underground installation, every hidden base they had ever been forced to work in or build. A complete map of the Dominion's infrastructure, stored in 1,000,000 small mines for generations. It was, Drake thought, the most expensive intelligence database in history. And the Vreth had built it themselves, one cruelty at a time. On the last night before the reckoning turned back toward Earth, Drake stood alone on the observation deck. Iris found him there. She stood beside him without speaking for a while, looking at the stars. "Are you all right?" she asked eventually. He thought about it honestly. "I don't know. I've been thinking about something Holt said a long time ago, that all we ever wanted was to be free."
He paused.
"But now 4 species are looking at us like we know what free looks like. And I'm not sure we've figured that out for ourselves yet." Iris was quiet for a moment. Then, "Maybe that's exactly why they're looking at us. Because we're still figuring it out, same as them." Drake thought about that for the rest of the journey home. 40 days left before Cross's fleet arrived. The coalition of free worlds was real now. They came out of hyperspace at the edge of the Sol system in a formation so large that the sensors on the reckoning took 3 full seconds to finish counting them. 4,000 warships. Each one bigger than anything in the human fleet. Each one crewed by soldiers who had never lost a battle, never retreated, never been asked to do anything except win. Drake stood on the bridge and looked at the numbers on the screen. Then he looked at his own fleet, 1,200 human ships and 800 coalition vessels, arranged in a wide defensive line across the mouth of the Sol system. 2,000 against 4,000. Every ship they had, everything they had built, everything the last 40 years had been working toward, sitting in open space waiting to find out if it was enough. "They expected us to run," Cole said from the station behind him. "I know," Drake said. "Are we running?" Drake watched the Vreth formation hold its distance. They were staying outside what they calculated as resonance range, careful, measured, exactly as he had expected. "No," he said. "We're going to make them come to us." The first hour was silence. Both fleets held position. The Vreth ran scans. The humans let them. Vance sat in the weapons bay monitoring the resonance units, her eyes moving steadily across her instruments, not speaking. Cole's fighter squadron sat in the launch tubes, engines warm, waiting. Cross was being careful. Drake had counted on that. A careful enemy does not charge. A careful enemy probes. It sends small groups forward to test responses, to map defenses, to look for weaknesses. And while it is busy being careful, a patient enemy can move things into position. At the 40-minute mark, Drake gave a quiet order. 14 human ships peeled away from the defensive line and moved slowly toward the Vreth formation. Not charging, not threatening, just moving. Drifting forward, engines at low power, like they had lost formation discipline. The Vreth sent 40 ships to intercept. The 14 human ships turned and ran. The 40 Vreth ships followed, straight into the kill corridor. Waiting railgun platforms, unmanned, positioned 3 days earlier, running silent, opened fire from 3 directions simultaneously. 26 Vreth ships were dead before the remaining 14 could turn. The other 14 scattered. Cross pulled his probing force back. There was a pause of 9 minutes. Then 4,000 ships began to move. What followed was 6 hours of the worst fighting Drake had ever seen. The Vreth came in waves, not a single charge, but a rolling advance, wave after wave, each one pushing closer, absorbing losses, trying to wear down the human line through pure numbers. It was a strategy that had worked against every enemy they had ever faced. It almost worked here. Drake moved his ships constantly, never holding a fixed position, never giving the Vreth a stable target to coordinate against. The coalition ships, especially the Durin, who fought with a ferocity that even Drake found startling, covered the flanks, their salvaged weapons firing faster than anyone had expected from vessels held together by welding wire and stubbornness. Cole's fighters were everywhere. The squadron moved through the battle like water finding gaps in rock, threading between capital ships, drawing fire away from damaged vessels, appearing exactly where they were not expected. Cole flew like he had no regard whatsoever for the possibility that anything could kill him. His pilots flew the same way because he had taught them to, and because most of them had nothing left to lose either. Drake watched them on the tactical screen and said nothing. There was nothing to say. They knew what they were doing. At hour 3, the Reckoning took a direct hit to its lower engine section. The ship lurched hard. Lights failed across 2 decks. Drake grabbed the railing on the bridge and kept his feet. Somewhere below him, in the engine room, Sal Okonkwo was already moving. Vance activated the resonance gambit at hour 4. It was not the same as the one used over Earth. That had been a stationary pulse from ground-based emitters. This was something new, something she had designed in the 40 days between Earth's liberation and the arrival of Cross's fleet. A moving pulse, broadcast from 12 ships positioned in a specific geometric pattern, capable of covering a shifting area of space as the pattern moved. She had told Drake about it 2 days before the battle. He had asked how confident she was. Confident enough, she had said, which from Vance meant completely. The 12 ships moved into position over the course of 20 minutes, each one appearing to be retreating, drifting back under fire, which the Vreth read as weakness and pressed toward. When the pattern locked, Vance triggered the pulse. 400 Vreth ships stopped. Not exploded. Not damaged. Stopped, lights out, engines dead, weapons offline, drifting silent in the middle of the battle formation like 400 enormous tombstones. The effect on the remaining Vreth fleet was immediate and total. They had known the resonance weapon existed. They had known it could stop individual ships. But 400 at once, a full tenth of the entire fleet, frozen in an instant, was something different. That was not a weapon. That was a demonstration. That was the enemy saying, "We can do this to any of you. All of you. Whenever we choose." Cross gave the order Drake had never expected to hear. Retreat. The Vreth fleet pulled back. Not in panic, they were too disciplined for panic, but steadily, systematically, every ship turning and moving away from Seoul at combat speed. In 500 years of Vreth military history, no admiral had ever ordered a full retreat. Cross had just become the first. The battle was over. Drake stood on the bridge and watched the last Vreth ship disappear from the sensors. The bridge was quiet, the kind of quiet that follows something enormous, when people are still catching up to what has just happened. Then someone started clapping. Then someone else. Within seconds, the entire bridge crew was on their feet, and through the ship's internal comm, Drake could hear the same sound spreading through every deck. Not cheering exactly, more like release, like 200 years of held breath finally let out all at once. He let them have it. They had earned it. Then the damage reports began coming in. 340 ships lost. Thousands dead. Humans, Duran, Kalori crew members who had volunteered to serve aboard coalition vessels. Names that would need to be read out loud somewhere, someday, by someone with the time and the courage to do it. And then Cole's voice on the comm, quiet and careful in the way that meant bad news. Captain, you need to come to the engine bay. Drake already knew. He had known since the hit at hour 3, since Sal had gone below and not come back up to the bridge. He found Sal on the floor of the engine room, 2 of his engineers kneeling beside him, the consoles around them dark and then lit again because Sal had gotten them running before he went down. His eyes were open. He looked, Drake thought, like a man who had finished something. Drake sat beside him on the floor of the engine room for a long time. Outside, the Sol system was quiet. The threshold was held. The Vreth would not pass this way again. But some things you win, and still feel the loss sitting in your chest like a stone that will never quite go away. They write songs about the charge, the explosion, the moment the enemy turns and runs. They write about fire and speed, and the roar of engines pushing through open space. Those things make good songs. People remember them. People sing them. Nobody writes about the part where you sit in a quiet room and sign 340 casualty reports, one name at a time. Drake signed every one himself. He could have delegated it. Several people offered. He said no. He did not fully know why, except that it felt wrong to let someone else carry those names. These were people who had trusted him. The least he could do was write their names with his own hand. It took most of 2 days. The medbay on the Reckoning held 400 wounded. Drake walked through it on the morning of the second day. The ship's doctor, a quiet woman named Dr. Fenn, walked beside him without speaking unless he asked a question. He asked very few. Mostly he just walked and looked and let people see him there, which was all most of them seemed to need. A Duran fighter near the end of the row, one of Ara's people, missing an arm now, making her equal with her commander, watched Drake pass and said something in her own language. The translator caught it a second late. She says you fight like someone who has nothing left to lose, Dr. Fenn said quietly. Drake looked at the Duran. Tell her that's the nicest thing anyone has ever said to me. The Duran made the deep sound that meant laughter. Even missing an arm, she made it sound like a cannon shot. Cole came to Drake's cabin that evening. He stood in the doorway looking like someone who had something to say, but had not yet decided how to say it. Drake waved him in. Cole sat down on the edge of the chair across from the desk and was quiet for a moment. I lost 9, Cole said. Out of 22. Drake said nothing. He let that number sit in the air between them. I keep thinking about whether I put them in the right places, Cole said. Whether a different call at hour 2. If I had held back instead of pushing toward the left flank. He stopped. I don't know. I keep running it again in my head, and I keep getting different answers. Drake leaned back in his chair. He had been having the same conversation with himself about different decisions for 2 days straight. You're going to run it forever, Drake said. Every commander does. You never stop finding the places where you think you could have done better. That's not a flaw. That's what keeps you from making the same mistakes twice. He paused. But you also have to let it stop at some point. Because the 9 who didn't come back, they knew the risk. They were there because they chose to be. You didn't take that from them. Cole stared at the floor for a while. Does it get easier? He asked. Drake thought about Sal. About Henrik. About Tom Hurst on the docks, 2 crates short. No, he said. But you get better at carrying it. Cole nodded. He sat there a little longer, then got up and left. Drake watched him go and thought that the boy had aged 10 years in a week, and that there was nothing to be done about that, and that it was one of the saddest things about war. It spent the young first. Vance found him on the observation deck the following morning. She sat down beside him, without being invited, which was normal for her. She had a tablet in her hand, but she was not looking at it. The Vreth are adapting, she said. Drake looked at her. I've been monitoring their communications since the battle. The ones we can still intercept through the Kalori network. She set the tablet on the seat between them. They are retrofitting their drive cores. It is not a perfect fix. It will take months to refit the whole fleet, and the modified cores are less efficient. But if they complete it, the resonance weapon becomes significantly less effective. Drake was quiet for a moment. How long? If they work fast, 3 months. Maybe 4. She paused. We have one more major engagement where we can use the resonance at full effectiveness. After that, we are fighting a more equal war. Then we need to end it before then. Or get to a negotiating position strong enough that ending it becomes the Vretha's idea too. She looked at him. Which brings me to the second thing. She pulled up a message on the tablet.
Short.
Encrypted with a cipher Drake did not recognize. Sent through 3 relay jumps, all caloric-controlled, all untraceable. It came in last night, Vance said. From inside the Vreth command structure. A senior figure. She identifies herself only as Vren. Drake read the message. It was careful and formal and said almost nothing in a great many words, the way political messages always do. But underneath the careful language, the meaning was plain enough.
She wanted to talk.
The Coalition Council met the next day. 12 leaders around a table, humans, Durin, Kalori elders via hologram, Senth represented by a single small figure who sat very still and said nothing but missed nothing. Iris Callow sat at Drake's right, her notes organized in neat columns, her face carefully neutral in the way it went when she was thinking hard. Rees laid out the 2 positions plainly. Push the offensive now, before the Vreth finished adapting their ships, before the resonance window closed. Or pursue the contact from Vren, explore whether a political solution was possible, hold the military advantage in reserve. The room divided almost immediately. Ara, her remaining 2 arms folded across her chest, was direct. We did not fight to negotiate. We fought to win. If we talk now from a position of strength, the Vreth will use the time to strengthen themselves, and we will talk ourselves into a weaker position. Iris, quietly, offered the third path. Not war, and not peace exactly, but a formal framework. A galactic law. Something that had never existed before, because no one had ever been in a position to demand it. Terms that the Vreth would have to accept not as a defeated enemy surrendering, but as a party bound by something larger than either side. The room went quiet in the way it does when someone says something unexpected that turns out to be right. Drake looked at Iris for a moment. She was 26 years old. She had never been off-planet before this mission. She had written the framework in her cabin during the 3 days after the battle, working through the night, saying nothing about it to anyone until now. Draft it, Drake said. Iris nodded and made a note. That evening Drake sat with Holt, still alive, still sharp, her one arm resting on the table, her eyes as clear as ever. She listened to everything and was quiet for a while. We always said we just wanted to be free, she said. We are free, Drake said. Yes. She looked at him. And now everyone is asking us what free looks like. What it means. What rules it runs on.
She paused.
That girl Callow, she's the one who understands this part. Not us. We know how to fight. She knows what comes after. Drake thought about that for a long time after Holt went to sleep. Outside the viewport, the stars were the same as they had always been. Distant and cold, and indifferent to everything that happened in the space between them. But the space between them was different now. The people in it were different. Whatever came next, there was no putting that back. 18 months after the Battle of the Threshold, the war had no front line. It had 40 of them. Across 3 sectors, coalition forces were engaged on 9 worlds simultaneously, holding liberated planets against Vreth counterattacks, protecting supply lanes through Kalori relay points, supporting local uprisings on worlds that had risen after Earth's signal and now needed more than inspiration to survive. It was not the clean, decisive war Drake had imagined when he stood in the Atlantic cavern and counted warships. It was slow and grinding and expensive, the kind of war that does not end in one great moment, but in 1,000 small ones, each one costing something. Drake was not a colonel anymore. The title Supreme Commander had been given to him by the Coalition Council 6 months after the Threshold. He had tried to refuse it. Holt had told him, in the flat voice she used when she was done discussing something, that what he wanted was not the point. He had accepted it. He hated the title. He wore it anyway. The Vreth Dominion was coming apart from the inside. The synth maps had proved their value 100 times over. Every hidden Vreth base, every underground installation, every supply depot and command relay that the synth had built with their own hands over generations, the coalition knew where all of it was. Strikes were precise. Resources were cut. One by one, the outer territories of the Dominion began to go quiet. But the Vreth were not breaking. They were fracturing. 3 separate internal conflicts had erupted within the Dominion in the past year. Younger lords seizing territory from older ones. Regional commanders cutting deals with local populations to preserve their own power base. The structure of empire, which looks solid from the outside, turning out to be a collection of individual ambitions held together by fear of the center, and when the center began to look weak, those ambitions pulled apart. Cross was still in command, still issuing orders, still running his campaign with the cold precision of a man who had never failed at anything and refused to begin now. But he was fighting a different war than the one he had prepared for. And it was visible, to anyone paying attention, that it was costing him. Drake spent most of his time in the command center on Earth. The old remnant cavern under the Atlantic had been expanded, new corridors, new rooms, new stations filled with people from a dozen species working alongside each other with the slightly awkward focus of people who are still learning each other's habits. It was not graceful. It was frequently chaotic. It worked. He missed being on a ship. Supreme commanders did not fly missions. They received reports and made decisions and attended meetings and signed documents and gave interviews to the Coalition's new information service, which broadcast updates to every free world twice a day. People had started painting Drake's face on walls. On 3 different liberated worlds, children had been named after him.
He found all of it grotesque.
You don't get to choose what you mean to them, Vance told him one evening, when he said as much out loud. She was at her desk, working on the 3rd revision of the resonance dampener problem, a mug of tea cooling beside her untouched as always. You only get to choose what you do next. That's not very comforting, he said. It wasn't meant to be, she said, and went back to her work. The message from Vren came through properly 6 weeks after their first contact. Not a careful political nothing this time. A full proposal. Detailed. Specific. Terms that Iris had read 3 times and then come to Drake with her eyes slightly wider than usual, which for Iris meant she was genuinely surprised. She's real, Iris said. And she has actual authority. This is not a delay tactic. Vren was an elder lord of the Dominion, one of the old bloodlines, with real standing in the Vreth command structure. She had been opposed to the Earth campaign from the beginning, had argued against Cross privately for years, and had been ignored. Now, with the Dominion fracturing and the war going badly and Cross's position weakening by the month, she had enough support among the older lords to make an offer that could actually hold. The terms were not everything the coalition wanted, but they were real. Recognition of all liberated worlds as sovereign. Full withdrawal of Vreth forces from occupied territories. War reparations, not in resources but in knowledge, in technology transfers, in the kind of debt that takes generations to repay. And a seat at the table in the galactic framework Iris had been quietly drafting for 6 months. Drake read the terms twice. Then he called the Coalition Council. Ara was the hardest to convince. The Vreth do not honor agreements, she said, her 2 remaining arms crossed, her expression the same one she had worn going into battle, flat and certain and completely unafraid. They have 400 years of proof on our world alone. The Dominion that made those agreements is not the same structure that would be signing this one, Ira said.
Calm.
Patient. She had gotten very good at patient. Vren's faction is not Cross. The framework we are building does not trust goodwill. It creates consequences. There is a difference. Ara stared at her for a long moment. If they break it, Ara said, we finish what we started. Yes, Drake said simply. We do. Ara unfolded her arms. Then I will not stand in the way. She looked at Drake. But I want it known. I do not trust them. Nobody's asking you to, Drake said. We're asking you to hold them accountable. That's different. The council voted. It was not unanimous, but it was enough. Then Cross launched to strike. 3 coalition worlds. Without warning. Without communication. A hard, fast attack, clearly designed to collapse the peace process before it could take hold, to show Vren's faction and everyone watching that the Dominion under Cross would not negotiate from a position of retreat. Millions died in 72 hours. Drake received the news in the early morning, alone in the command center, the building quiet around him. He sat with it for a while, the specific weight of a number that large and the specific, quieter weight of knowing that he had seen this coming and had moved toward peace anyway, and that the decision had cost people their lives. He did not second-guess the decision. Second-guessing was for later, for the long hours when there was nothing else to do. Right now, there was only what came next. He called Vance first, then Iris, then Cole, who was commanding a battle group near the outer territories and whose voice on the comm, when Drake told him what had happened, went very quiet in the particular way that meant he was making himself stay calm. The peace talks were over. The last window was open. Drake looked at the star map on the wall. The full reach of the Vreth Dominion, 400 years of empire, 300 systems, and let himself think the thought he had been avoiding for 6 months. There was only one way to end this cleanly. They had to go to Vreth Prime. There was a conversation Drake had with Vance the night before the fleet left. They were in the command center, just the 2 of them, the building empty and quiet around them at 2 in the morning. She had a diagram on her screen.
He was not looking at it.
"We could glass it," he said. Vance did not look up from her screen. "Yes. We have the capability. The resonance emitters at full range, coordinated strike, simultaneous shutdown of every ship in their home defense fleet. And after that," he stopped. "After that we would be exactly what they were," Vance said, still not looking up. Drake was quiet for a moment. "I know." She finally looked at him. "You already know what you're going to do. You came here at 2 in the morning because you wanted someone to tell you it's the right call." He said nothing.
"It's the right call," she said.
Then she went back to her diagram. Drake went to sleep. In the morning, the fleet left for Vreth Prime. 300 ships. Not the whole coalition fleet. Most of it stayed behind, holding the freed worlds, protecting the supply lanes, keeping the 40 fronts from collapsing while the reckoning went deep into Vreth space. 300 ships was enough for what Drake had in mind. It was not enough for a conquest. It was more than enough for a demonstration. The journey took 11 days through calori relay points that the Vreth no longer controlled. They moved fast and quiet, changing course twice, when Synth intelligence flagged patrol patterns ahead. Cole's fighters ran perimeter sweeps every 6 hours. Nobody slept much. On the 8th day, Drake called the senior officers together in the Reckoning's briefing room. He stood at the front of the room and looked at the faces. Cole, Iris, the Duran battle commander Kel, who had replaced Ara after she was wounded again on the outer front, a calori liaison whose name Drake still could not pronounce correctly, but who had never once seemed bothered by this. "We're not going to destroy Vreth Prime," Drake said. "We are going to park above it. And then we are going to give the Vreth people, not Cross, not the Command Council, 72 hours to answer the same terms Vren already agreed to." Kel looked at him steadily. "And if they do not answer?" "They will," Drake said. "How do you know?" Drake thought for a moment. "Because Cross knows what we can do. His people have seen it. When we are sitting above their homeworld and we have not fired a single shot, that says something that guns cannot say. It says we are choosing not to. That we could, and we are choosing not to." He paused. "Fear makes people fight harder. But being shown mercy by someone who has every reason to destroy you, that breaks something different. Something deeper." The room was quiet. Iris, in the back, made a small note on her tablet. The Vreth Home Defense Fleet came out to meet them 2 days from Vreth Prime. 600 ships. Still a formidable force even with everything the war had cost the Dominion. They formed up in a hard defensive line between the Coalition fleet and the planet, weapons hot, shields at maximum. Drake did not slow down. The battle lasted 6 hours. It was not the desperate grinding fight of the Threshold. This was different. The Vreth home fleet was fighting for their world, which made them dangerous in a specific way, the way any creature is most dangerous, when it is cornered. But they were also fighting an enemy that now had 18 months of war experience, a full tactical picture from synth intelligence, and resonance weapons that, even partially adapted against, still worked well enough. At hour 4, the Vreth fleet broke into two groups. One fell back, toward the planet. One held position, still fighting. Drake targeted the one still fighting, and left the retreating group alone. Cole noticed it from his fighter. "You're letting them go." "They're going home," Drake said on the open call and let them. The message that sent, broadcast on every open frequency, was not lost on anyone watching. By hour 6, the remaining Vreth Defense Force had surrendered or withdrawn. The Coalition fleet moved into orbit above Vreth Prime. Drake opened a galaxy-wide broadcast. Not just Vreth frequencies. Everything. Every relay in the Kalori network, every open channel, every frequency that anything with a receiver could hear. He did not make a speech. He had thought about making a speech. Iris had written 3 versions. He had read them all and set them aside. Instead, he read the terms.
Plain. Direct.
No extra words. The same terms Vren had proposed, the same framework Iris had built, the same conditions the Coalition Council had voted on. He read them clearly, at normal speed, as if he were reading a document to a room of people who simply needed to hear it out loud. Then he said, 72 hours. The answer comes from the people of the Dominion. Not from Admiral Cross. From the people. And he cut the broadcast. The fleet held position. They did not advance. They did not fire. They sat in orbit above the Vreth homeworld and waited, and the waiting was itself the loudest thing Drake could have said. Cross was removed from command in 36 hours. Not by Drake. Not by the Coalition. By his own command council, the senior Vreth lords who had backed him for years and who now, with an enemy fleet sitting above their homeworld and choosing not to strike, understood something that Cross had never been able to accept. The war was over. Not because they had been defeated, though they had been, but because the enemy above them was demonstrating, in the most visible way possible, that destruction was not the goal, that there was a different kind of ending available. Cross was escorted from the command tower quietly. He did not fight it. He was old and tired, and perhaps, Drake thought later, some part of him had already known. Vren's faction took control within the hour. Her formal acceptance of the terms came through at 51 hours, 21 hours early. Cole was running a perimeter sweep when the message came in. He patched Drake into the visual feed without saying anything first, just opened the channel so Drake could see what Cole was seeing. The Vreth Defense Fleet, what remained of it, weapons powering down one ship at a time. The lights on their hulls shifting from red to the dim standard running glow of vessels at rest. An entire enemy armada standing down. Drake watched it for a long time, without speaking. He thought of old Tom on the docks. 2 crates short. He thought of Henrik, 4 days of silence and then nothing. He thought of Sal on the engine room floor, looking like a man who had finished something. He thought of the photo on Tom's desk, 3 small faces grinning at a camera, and wondered if those children were still alive, and whether they would grow up in a world that was different from the one their grandfather had died in. "Sir?" Cole's voice, quiet. "Orders?" Drake looked at Vreth Prime on the view screen. A planet. An old empire. A people who had done terrible things, and would now have to live with what came after them. Same as everyone else. "Turn us around," Drake said. "We're going home." The Reckoning did not fire a single shot at Vreth Prime. The galaxy saw that. Nobody who was watching ever forgot it. 5 years after the Treaty of Vreth Prime, the galaxy was still adjusting. That was the honest answer if anyone asked. Not healed. Not fixed. Not suddenly a place of easy trust and clean borders and problems that had simple solutions. 5 years was not enough time to undo 400 years. Anyone who said otherwise was selling something. But things were different. That much was undeniable. The shape of the galaxy had changed. Not the stars, not the distances, not the cold physical facts of space. But the arrangement of power inside it, the understanding of who could do what to whom and what the cost would be. All of that was different now. Permanently, irreversibly different. Earth had done that. A dirt colony. A quiet world. A species the Dominion had once called simple. Iris Callow was 29 years old. She sat at the head of the first session of the Galactic Parliament as its secretary, the first holder of that office, because there had been no such office before, because there had been no such parliament before, because the framework she had drafted in her cabin on the Reckoning during 3 sleepless nights after the Battle of the Threshold had become, over 5 years of argument and revision and careful negotiation, the actual governing law of an interspecies coalition that now included 23 worlds. She had never expected any of that.
She had just thought it needed to exist.
So she built it. Drake sat in the gallery above the parliament floor and watched her open the session. She was calm and precise and slightly formal in the way she always was in public, and she said exactly what needed to be said and nothing extra, and when she finished the room was quiet for just a moment before the applause started. He had known from the first day she unfolded that third path in the Coalition Council that she was the one who understood this part. Holt had said it. Holt was right, as she usually was. He stayed for the opening ceremony. Then he left quietly before anyone could ask him to speak. Vance's research had gone somewhere no one expected. The resonance technology built as a weapon, used as a weapon, the thing that had made everything else possible, turned out to have a second life. Vreth biology and human biology shared almost nothing. But several other species in the coalition had physiological systems that, when studied through the lens of resonance harmonics, showed patterns that overlapped in interesting ways. Vance had noticed it first 3 years ago, published a paper that most people did not understand, and then spent 2 years turning it into something that doctors could use. The result was a medical technology that worked across 6 species. A treatment that had already saved hundreds of thousands of lives on Durin and Kalori worlds, lives that would have been lost to conditions that had previously had no answer. Enemies who had tried to destroy each other were now curing each other's diseases. Vance had said, when asked about it at a conference, that she found this deeply funny in a way she could not fully explain. The journalist who interviewed her had not understood. Drake had, when he read the transcript. He had laughed alone in his office for a full minute. Ben Cole went home. He had stayed in the Coalition fleet for 2 years after the treaty, running training programs for new pilots from 6 different worlds. He was good at it, patient in the way that people are when they have learned things the hard way and want to make sure no one else has to learn them the same way. Then one morning he put in his resignation, collected his things, and got on a transport back to Earth. His sister was alive. She had been among the first freed when the labor camps were emptied after the treaty. She had spent 2 years recovering, slowly, quietly, in a way that she did not talk about much. She had a small place near the coast, in a town that was being rebuilt from almost nothing, and she had a garden that she tended with the focused attention of someone who had learned to value things that grew slowly. Cole arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. She was in the garden. That moment belonged only to them. It was not recorded. It was not broadcast. Nobody wrote about it or painted it on a wall. It was just a brother and a sister in a garden by the sea, and it was enough. Drake went back to New London. He had been offered things. Positions, titles, a seat on the Parliament Council, a building named after him in 3 different cities. He declined all of it. Not with a speech, not with a dramatic statement, just quietly one by one, saying no and meaning it. The docks were being rebuilt. Not the Vreth docks. Those had been torn down in the first year after liberation, stripped to the foundations, and cleared away. New docks. Human docks, built to human specifications, for ships that carried goods between free worlds and brought back things that people wanted rather than tribute extracted by force. Drake got a job on the waterfront. Loading and unloading. Physical work. The kind that leaves you tired in the body and quiet in the head, which was exactly what he had needed for a long time without quite knowing it. He liked the smell of the sea. He thought about old Tom sometimes, on the long mornings when the light came in low and flat off the water. He thought about what Tom had known about these docks, every number, every lane, every rhythm of the work. He thought that Tom would have liked to see them now. He thought that was the closest thing to peace he had found. Holt gave one final speech. She was 75 years old. Still one arm. Still wire and cold air. She stood at the podium of the Galactic Parliament on its opening day and looked out at the faces, Human faces, Duran faces, Kalori faces, Senth clustered together in the back rows, representatives of 23 worlds in one room, and she was quiet for a moment before she began. She did not talk about the war. She did not talk about the battles, or the ships, or the resonance weapon, or any of the things that people expected her to talk about. She said, "We did not hit back because we were angry. Anger was there, yes. 200 years of it. But anger alone does not build what we built. Anger does not hold its fire when it has the chance to burn everything down. Anger does not send a fleet to the enemy's homeworld and choose not to fire." She paused. "We hit back because we remembered who we were. A species that builds things. That endures. That refuses, even after everything, to forget that life is supposed to mean something." She looked around the room slowly. "We offer that not as a weapon, not as proof that we are better than anyone else. We offer it as an invitation to build something here that means something, together." She sat down. The room was quiet for 3 full seconds. Then the Durans started clapping, all 4 arms, which made a sound like thunder, and after that it was impossible to hear anything for a very long time. On the far edge of the galaxy, a signal arrived. It reached a small world that had never heard of Earth. A world whose people had their own history, their own struggles, their own long and complicated relationship with the stars above them. The signal was old, 5 years in transit, compressed and faded by the distance. But it was still clear enough to see. A fleet of ships rising from oceans, rising from mountains, rising all at once, in the dark, in perfect silence, into a sky that had belonged to someone else for 200 years.